Now, binding inline styles dynamically, as we're doing it here, works, but inline styles have a couple of disadvantages. They overrule all other styles, which sometimes is what you'll need, but often leads to problems. Therefore, in modern web development and CSS, we typically don't use inline styles too often. So let's actually get rid of that, and let me instead show you something else. How we can bind CSS classes dynamically. Because that's an alternative approach we could use here. Let's for a moment go to Styles CSS, and let's add a new CSS class here, a new CSS class selector. I'll name it active, but you can use any name you want. And the only rule or the only property I'll style in there is border color, which is set to red. Well, actually, to make it even easier to see, let me also change the background color to salmon. But this is optional. So now we have this active CSS class here in the CSS file, which we can now close. And now let's say we want to add this class dynamically to this div if box A selected is true. So therefore, of course, we can bind the class attribute dynamically with vbind or this shorthand with just :class. Now, class, of course, needs a string now. The name of the class that should be added. For example, demo, which is responsible for this default box style. That's why I'm passing in a string here. But we could now make sure that we pass more than just that string if indeed box A is selected. So if box A selected here is true. And for that, we could again check box A selected. So check this property in a ternary expression. We can use JavaScript here now because we're binding this with vbind. Check if that's truthy, and if it is, we add demo and active. And this needs to be a string because this is all evaluated as JavaScript here, and we want to return a string with these classes to class if that is selected. Else, in this ternary expression, we'll just add demo. So that active is only added if box A selected is true. And if I reload, this works. However, this is not the nicest code. It's a bit hard to read. And imagine how difficult this would be to read if we had more classes that we want to toggle dynamically. Thankfully, just as with style, Vue.js supports a special syntax, especially for the class attribute as well, if you're binding it with vbind. You can pass an object here as well, which normally would not work. If you don't bind it, that does not make any sense. But if you do bind it, Vue supports this object syntax, and in there you can now add properties where the property names reflect your CSS classes, and the values of those properties are true or false, or a truthy or falsy result that indicates whether that class should be added. So we could add demo as a key name, as a property name, and set it to true, so that demo is always added, and add active and set the value of active to box A selected, so that the active class is added to this div if box A selected is truthy. And if we save that and reload, we get the same behavior as before, but with much more readable code. Especially if we add more and more classes here, this stays readable and stays maintainable, which of course is super important. And now we could do the same on the other divs as well. But actually, before we do that, I want to simplify that even more. Setting demo to true is a bit redundant. We always add that class. So therefore, thankfully, we can remove it from here, remove it from this object, and instead add the class attribute like this and set it to demo, and have our dynamically bound class attribute in addition. So this one here is not dynamically bound. I'm not having a colon here. So that's the regular class attribute. And I'll set it to demo. And Vue will basically just recognize that and never change it. But then I also bind class dynamically. And what Vue will do is it will evaluate the result of this dynamic class binding and merge it with the hard-coded one here. With that, if I reload, we get the same behavior as before, but with even less code, or even easier to manage code, I should say. Well, and of course now we can easily bring that over to the other divs as well, if we want to, and just check for box B selected and box C selected. And with that, we can highlight those boxes as well. We cannot unmark them at the moment, but still, this is how you can add dynamic classes and dynamic styling with Vue. Now, if we want to make sure that users can actually toggle this and not just mark it as active, we can simply go to our code and change this a little bit. And instead of setting this box A selected to true all the time, I'll set it to the opposite of this box A selected. So that in the end, if box A was selected, if it was true, it's now false, thanks to this exclamation mark. And this false value is the new value for box A selected. And I'll do the same for the other boxes. And with this simple adjustment, we ensure that this now is toggleable, that we can toggle this and not just set it as active, but also set it as inactive.